You know that old saying, you can't fight City Hall? Well, imagine if City Hall lived right next door, shared a property line with you, and had a detail of armed state troopers guarding his trash cans. My name's Jeremy. My wife Simone and I bought our forever home in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania back in 2018. If you know anything about the Philly suburbs, you know it's all about history, old stone houses, mature oak trees, and neighbors who lived on the same street since the Nixon administration. Our house was a classic: stone facade, a wide driveway, and a beautiful, narrow strip of shared lawn that sat between us and the massive estate next door. For years, things were fine. Our neighbor was a high-ranking politician, a guy named James. He was ambitious, sure, but he was a good neighbor, James. We'd wave while he was getting into his black SUV. He'd send over a holiday card. It was the American dream. Then James won the big seat. He became the governor. Suddenly, our quiet cul-de-sac turned into a fortress. Blacked-out Suburbans parked at the curb 24/7, men in earpieces walking the perimeter. But the real war didn't start with a vote. It started with a match. In April 2025, arsonists targeted the governor's residence. It was a terrifying night. We saw the flames from our bedroom window. The peace of the suburbs was incinerated in about 10 minutes. 2 weeks later, the governor didn't come over with a warning. He came over with a plan. He wanted to build an 8-foot-tall, high-security steel fence. The problem, he wanted to build it right through the middle of the land I pay taxes on. I'm standing in my kitchen today, looking at a legal bill that looks like a phone number and a line of state troopers standing on my grass, and I realized I'm not just fighting a neighbor, I'm fighting the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for 900 square feet of dirt. And I'm not backing down. To understand James, you have to understand the security mindset. Once you're the governor, you stop seeing neighbors and you start seeing perimeters. James wasn't just James anymore. He was a state asset. After the fire, the atmosphere on our street changed. The suburban zen was replaced by tactical tension. Silas, the governor's chief of security, was a man who looked like he hadn't blinked since 2004. He was the one who knocked on our door first. "Mr. Miller," Silas said, not stepping inside, "the governor's office has authorized a security upgrade. We're installing a reinforced 8-foot fence along the western boundary. We've reviewed the site, and for the fence to be tactically sound, we need to shift the line about 5 feet into your side. It's for the governor's safety." "5 feet?" Simone asked, standing behind me. "That's our entire privacy hedge. That's where our kids play. Why not build it on your side?" "The grade of the land makes that impossible for the sensors," Silas said, as if he were talking about a military base in a war zone. "We're prepared to offer you a fair market lease for the strip of land. It's a matter of public interest." They offered us a pittance, a couple of $100 a month to effectively give up a massive portion of our yard. We said no. We didn't want the money. We wanted our land. We suggested a compromise, a different fence material, a slight curve in the line. The governor's office didn't compromise. They pivoted. James stopped waving. He stopped looking our way. He went from being a neighbor to being a plaintiff. One morning, I woke up to find 2 Pennsylvania state troopers standing on the disputed strip of grass. They weren't there for a crime. They were there to secure the construction site. Rick, the contractor James hired, started unloading heavy steel pickets. "Hey," I shouted, running out in my bathrobe, "you don't have a permit to build on this side of the line." "Governor's orders," Rick said, shrugging. "Security priority supersedes local zoning, or so the lawyers tell me. I'm just the guy with the drill, Mark." I looked at the state troopers. They looked at me. They had badges, guns, and the authority of the state. I had a bathrobe, and a property map from 2018. That was the moment I realized that James wasn't just building a fence. He was invading. For the next week, my backyard felt like occupied territory. Every time Simone or I stepped outside to get the mail or play with the dog, a state trooper would adjust his position to watch us. They were literally standing on the land where our kids' swing set used to be. I called the local police. The dispatcher sounded like she wanted to crawl into a hole. "Sir, we have a report, but that's the governor's detail. We can't interfere with state police security operations. You'll have to take that up with the county court." It was a total blackout. The local government was terrified of the governor. The HOA, which usually sends a nasty letter if your grass is a half-inch too long, was suddenly silent. Bill, the HOA president, actually blocked my number. The social pressure started on Nextdoor and the Abington Community Group. Someone, probably a staffer in the governor's office, posted, "Why are some neighbors putting the governor's life at risk over a few inches of grass? In light of the arson attack, shouldn't we all be supporting the safety of our state's leader?" The comments were a bloodbath. "The Millers are being greedy. It's just dirt. Let the man have his fence. They must be from out of state. Real Pennsylvanians protect their own." Simone was crying by Tuesday. "They're making us look like monsters, Jeremy. We're just trying to keep our yard." "That's exactly what they want," I said, looking out at the black Suburbans. "They've forgotten one thing. James bought his house in 2003. I bought mine in 2018. He thinks he owns the land because he's used it for 20 years. But I've got the receipts." I hired a lawyer named Sarah. She was a specialist in Pennsylvania property law, a woman who treated a deed like a holy relic. We went to the Montgomery County Recorder of Deeds. We didn't just look at our deed, we looked at the history of the governor's house. "Here's the thing about Pennsylvania," Sarah said, pointing to a dusty volume of tax maps. "We have one of the longest adverse possession requirements in the country. To claim someone else's land as your own, you have to prove that you've had actual, continuous, visible, notorious, and hostile use of it for 21 years. "James bought the house in 2003, I said. "That's 22 years ago. He thinks he's cleared the clock." "He thinks he has," Sarah said, a wicked glint in her eye. "But look at the tax maps from 2003 to 2010, and look at this permit application James filed in 2005 for a garden expansion." We spent 8 hours digging through the paper trail. We found something the governor's high-priced state lawyers had missed. In 2007, the previous owner of our house, a sweet old lady named Mrs. Gable, had filed a notice of permission. She had allowed James to plant a row of privacy bushes on the edge of the line. "Jeremy," Sarah said, slamming the book shut, "if there is permission, there is no hostility. And without hostility, the adverse possession clock stops dead. James isn't at 22 years, he's at 0, because he admitted in 2007 that he knew the land didn't belong to him." But that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was the utility easement. We discovered that under that narrow strip of grass James wanted for his 8-foot steel fence, there was a major regional gas line, a high-pressure line that serviced the entire neighborhood. According to the Pennsylvania Public Utility Code, you cannot build a permanent weighted structure like a reinforced steel fence with concrete footings directly over a high-pressure gas main without a special variance from the state. James, the man who is the state, was about to violate his own utility laws. I didn't tell him. I watched as the governor's team prepared to pour the concrete. I watched the state troopers move their chairs back as the heavy machinery arrived. James came out on Thursday afternoon, looking triumphant. He was wearing his man of the people jeans and a work shirt. He actually walked over to the line and looked at me. "Jeremy," the governor said, his voice smooth and rehearsed, "I know this has been difficult, but leadership requires tough choices. This fence is about more than me. It's about the continuity of the government. I hope one day you'll understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly, Governor," I said, holding my phone up. "I'm recording this, by the way, for my records." "Record away," he said, turning his back. "The fence goes in tomorrow." The Nextdoor app was now reporting that the Miller resistance was over. People were congratulating the governor for taking charge. Newsweek had picked up the story with a headline, "PA Governor Triumphs in Local Property Dispute for Security Upgrade." They thought they had won. They thought the adverse possession lawsuit they had filed against me would scare me into a settlement. But they didn't know about the gas line, and they didn't know about Mrs. Gable's 2007 letter. I waited until the concrete mixer was backing down the driveway. I waited until the first shovelful of wet cement was hovering over the hole. Then I didn't call the governor. I called the Pico Energy emergency line and the Abington fire marshal. "Hi," I said, my voice steady. "I'm at 142 Ridge Road. My neighbor is currently pouring heavy concrete footings directly on top of the 12-inch high-pressure main. There's no protective sleeve, and the weight of the steel pickets is already causing the soil to shift. I'm worried about an explosion. Given the arson attack last month, this seems like a massive security risk." 10 minutes later, the suburban fortress didn't just have state troopers, it had sirens, lots of them. If you've never seen a high-stakes standoff between a state trooper detail and a local fire marshal, let me tell you, it is the most beautiful piece of theater you can watch from your own front porch. It was exactly 10:15 a.m. on Friday. The Pico Energy truck, a big utilitarian beast, screeched to a halt at the curb, blocking the governor's black Suburban. Right behind it was the Abington Fire Marshal's red SUV, lights flashing. The governor's security chief, Silas, stepped off the porch like he was prepared to intercept a threat. He had that "don't you know who lives here" look on his face. He met the marshal, a man named Henderson, who looked like he'd spent 30 years smelling smoke and had zero patience for politics, right at the property line. "Gentlemen," Silas said, his voice echoing, "this is a secure construction site. You're interfering with a state-sanctioned security upgrade." The marshal didn't even look at Silas's badge. He pointed at the concrete mixer. "I don't care if you're building a fortress for the Pope. You're pouring wet concrete over a 12-inch high-pressure gas main that serves 300 homes. If that line settles or cracks under the weight of an 8-foot reinforced steel fence, this entire cul-de-sac becomes a crater. Shut it down now." The governor, James, came out of his house. He was on his cell phone, his face tight. He tried to do the political handshake move, but the Pico lead technician was already busy unrolling a set of subterranean maps on the hood of his truck. "Is there a problem, Marshal?" James asked, his voice dripping with forced concern. "The problem, Governor," Henderson said, "is that your contractor didn't call 811 to mark the lines before digging your footings. That's a Class A violation of the Pennsylvania Underground Utility Line Protection Act. And since you're building on Mr. Miller's property without an easement, you've also bypassed the municipal safety review." James looked at me. I was sitting on my porch swing, a fresh cup of Wawa coffee in my hand, watching the fireflies start to wake up in the tall grass. I didn't say a word. I just raised my mug. James thought he could bully me with badges, but he forgot that the state's own safety laws were a shield he couldn't penetrate. But the real blow wasn't the gas line. It was the legal bomb Sarah was about to drop in the Montgomery County Courthouse. While the fire marshal was red-tagging the fence project, my lawyer Sarah was at the courthouse filing our answer and counterclaim. James's legal team had sued us for quiet title, claiming they owned the 900-square-foot strip through adverse possession. They argued that since James had mowed that grass and planted those shrubs since 2003, the land was his. In Pennsylvania, that 21-year mark is the holy grail for land grabbers. But Sarah had a secret weapon. She'd spent 3 days in the county archives, and what she found turned James's 21-year streak into a legal joke. We appeared in court 2 weeks later. It wasn't a crowded room, but NBC Philadelphia had a reporter sitting in the back row. James wasn't there. He sent 3 lawyers in $2,000 suits. "Your Honor," James's lead counsel said, standing with practiced confidence, "my client has maintained this property openly, notoriously, and exclusively for 22 years. The Mocks, the defendants, bought their home in 2018. They are interlopers on land that has long since shifted ownership through historical use." The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Walters, looked at Sarah. "What says the defense?" Sarah stood up. She didn't have 3 assistants, she just had one manila folder. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice clear and calm, "adverse possession requires hostile use. That means the person must be using the land against the owner's wishes. But in 2007, the governor's office, then just James, the private citizen, sent a letter to the previous owner, Mrs. Gable. She pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, the Gable letter. In this letter, James asked permission to plant those privacy shrubs. He thanked Mrs. Gable for allowing him to use that strip of land for his garden. The moment he asked for permission, the hostility requirement was legally severed. The 21-year clock reset to 0 in 2007. He isn't at 22 years, Your Honor. He's at 18. He's 3 years short of a legal claim. The governor's lawyers looked like they'd just been told the law was written in crayon. They started whispering furiously, but Sarah wasn't done. "Furthermore," she continued, "we are suing for slander of title. By filing a fraudulent adverse possession claim to secure a security fence, the governor has devalued my client's property and created a cloud on their title. We are requesting an immediate injunction and a judicial lien in the amount of the estimated land value, $100,000, until the land is restored." The judge leaned over her bench. "Counsel," she said to James's team, "do you have a rebuttal for the 2007 permission letter?" Silence. Total, beautiful silence. The empire wasn't just crumbling in court, it was exploding on social media. The governor versus the grunts narrative was about to hit the evening news, and James was about to learn that in the suburbs, reputation is a fragile thing. In the modern world, winning in court is only half the battle. You have to win the neighborhood verdict. The Nextdoor app, which had been a haven for my haters a week ago, suddenly flipped. Someone leaked the fire marshal's report and the court transcript. The narrative shifted in 24 hours. The governor tried to build a fence over a gas line? He tried to steal land from a young family because he was too cheap to pay for a proper easement? He's been using state troopers as personal bouncers for an illegal construction project. The Abington Community Group went from "protect the governor" to "protect our neighbors." Even Newsweek updated their article with the headline, "Governor's Land Claim Evaporates in Court, Neighbors Win Major Victory." James realized he was in a PR nightmare. He was a politician, and bully is the one label you can't scrub off. On a Tuesday evening, Silas, the security chief, didn't knock on my door. He stood on the sidewalk and waited for me to come out. He didn't look like a tactical genius anymore. He looked like a man who'd been told to fix a mess he didn't create. "The governor's withdrawing the lawsuit," Silas said, looking at the ground. "We're going to move the fence line back, 5 feet behind the property line, onto the governor's actual deeded land." And the state troopers? I asked. They'll be stationed on the governor's porch from now on, not your grass. But I didn't stop there. I'd learned a valuable lesson from the suburban War Master formula: diverse outcomes. I contacted the Montgomery County tax assessor. Hi, I said, I'd like to report a change in property use. My neighbor, the governor, has filed a legal claim in court stating that he has been the actual and exclusive owner of 900 square feet of my lot since 2003. If he claims he owned it, he should probably pay the back taxes on it for the last 20 years, shouldn't he? The tax assessor's office loves three things: rules, paperwork, and money. James was hit with a supplemental tax bill for 20 years of property taxes on that land, plus interest and penalties, totaling nearly $22,000. Since he had claimed in a court document that the land was his, he couldn't argue that he didn't owe the taxes. It was the ultimate tax karma. The demolition of the illegal footings took 2 days. This time, Rick the contractor didn't look smug. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I watched as they hauled away the steel pickets. I watched as they repaired the soil near the gas main. James didn't sell his house. Governors don't usually move because of a neighbor spat. He stopped treating the street like a military base. The black Suburbans parked further down the road. The state troopers began nodding hello to me when I mowed my lawn. We ended up signing a mutual boundary agreement. It was a 3-page document that defined the line down to the millimeter. James had to pay my $12,000 legal bill as part of the settlement to drop the slander of title suit. Today, my yard is open. My kids have their swing set back. The oak trees are still mine, and their natural light profile is safe. I learned something during those long months under the governor's shadow. I learned that in America, your house really is your castle. But a castle isn't just made of stone and wood. It's made of the warranty deed in your drawer and the county maps in the basement of the courthouse. People think power is about having a detail of state troopers. But in the suburbs, power is having the truth on your side and the patience to wait for the fire marshal to show up. So I'm asking you, if the most powerful man in your state told you his safety was more important than your property line, would you have signed the lease, or would you have gone to the courthouse and dug for the truth? Because where I live, the view of the valley is beautiful, but the view of a bully having to move his own fence, that is the most satisfying view of all. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to fight City Hall? Did you win, or did they pave over your dreams? I read every single story. And remember, the deed doesn't lie. People do.